So my friend called me up yesterday, told me that her toilet wasn't working properly. Supposedly the water is draining past the flap and it's not filling properly and not flushing properly. And so the water in this area is pretty bad, so I told her we could kind of tinker around with things and try to adjust things, or we could just rebuild it. She's okay with rebuilding it. She just doesn't want to replace the toilet. And so I told her we could just replace the components in the tank, and that's what I'm going to be showing you today. Okay, here's the toilet, and I already took the lid off from the tank. And this might look a little bit different than some of the toilets you've seen, maybe the one at your house. A lot of times they don't have the stuff here in the back, it's just kind of exposed in the back to where you can get to the bolts. And if you listen real carefully, and the components in the tank are what controls your toilet, the toilet flow. And so that's why, because the toilet isn't leaking, there's nothing else wrong with the rest of the toilet, I can use that universal replacement kit and just replace the components in the tank and basically have a whole new toilet. Here's the replacement kit. You can get these at Lowe's or Home Depot for about 20 some odd dollars, $22, $24. And it gives you this handy little list of things that can go wrong with your toilet. So if you're experiencing any of these problems, you can just replace these components in the tank and it'll fix everything. So how the water flows in your toilet is the supply line comes up and hooks onto this fitting. The water will come up here, and based on this float, whatever height the float is at, your tank will fill up to that portion. And this little chain here hooks to the handle outside and I'll lift this flap up. That lets the water go down into the bowl and flush everything out of the bowl. So I don't know how well you can see this, but the first thing I'm gonna do is turn off the water to the toilet. You can hear how that shut off. So when you shut off the supply line, there's still gonna be a little bit of water in the bottom. So then what you'll do, just open up the flap, let any water drain out that's gonna drain out. And then what I do is I throw a bunch of paper towels in there, soak up the water really well so I don't have a water mess. It's usually easier for me just to do that rather than try to figure out ways to drain the water. Okay, next what I'm going to do is at the bottom of this little tower here is where the supply line comes in. Okay, I'm going to disconnect the supply line in the back. There'll be a little bit of water that drops on the floor from the supply line. There's our supply line. So next you can see those bolts, and there's nuts and washers on the other side of the bolt. And so I'm going to loosen up the nut and the washer off from the bottom and push the bolt through, and I'll be able to lift off this tank. And then to take out those two screws, I'm just going to use some channel locks, and if they're just flathead screws, so I can just kind of unscrew these with a screwdriver. If they don't come out, sometimes you gotta get a little bit more aggressive with them and try to figure out something else. I prepared a little spot to set the tank on the floor because this tank is made of porcelain and it could possibly scratch something. Pull the tank off. Okay, I'm gonna get to work replacing the guts on this thing. Get some channel locks, loosen this up, and remember, all of this stuff is plastic. So when you go to put it all back together, don't start wrenching on stuff. A lot of this stuff's just kind of, just a hair more than finger tight. Okay, so you see the old piece, and all we're gonna do is replace it with a new piece. Okay, and it won't hurt just inside here. This is pretty clean, but maybe your water isn't as clean as this, so just kind of wipe around the inside of this hole here. Make sure there's no debris, so you'll get a nice seal with the gasket. When you put this in, this hose is going to go over to this other side. There it is. And the reason is this part is actually what fills the bowl. So as your tank is filling, get this good spot. As the water's coming into from the supply line, there's gonna be water that drops out into the tank, which will be used to flush everything down. But then this little tube goes into this other tube and drains water directly into the bowl. So it's this tube that actually fills up your bowl. And later on, I'll show you how to adjust this if you want more or less water in the bowl and more or less water in the tank. So the gasket's already in place. So I'm gonna set this just kind of horizontally in the tank through the hole here. And I'm just gonna tighten this down with this nut. And this one's a little bit different. It's kind of got a hex to it. This one actually has a couple tabs, so you can crank down on this and get it, you know, pretty hand tight. Okay. So even though this says universal, this is only a 2-inch drain, and the toilet that I'm replacing the parts in is a 3-inch drain. So I had to run up to Home Depot real fast, but I have the parts, and it basically works exactly the same way that I'm going to show you with the 2-inch drain and the 3-inch drain. Okay, so I have the drain out of the tank. I'm going to go ahead and clean up both sides, make sure it creates a good seal. Here's the new drain and flapper. It's for a 3-inch drain. So go ahead and install this. And if you think about the tank, and you'll see a little bit later, but this is actually going to sit in there at kind of an angle, so it stays away from that fill valve. And once again, a lot of these parts are plastic, so get things tight, but don't really crank down on them, and certainly don't use channel locks or anything. You can just kind of hand tighten it as tight as you can. If you're not sure you did get it tight enough, I mean, you can use channel locks if you want, but be very, very careful how tight you get some of these connections. In this set with a 3-inch replacement kit, they gave me some new bolts, so I'm gonna go ahead and put those on. And once again, just clean everything off inside really well. Okay, get these bolts pretty tight, but not too tight. This little gasket just goes here on the bottom. And then all I'm going to do is pick this up and set it right back into place. So that black gasket will sit here, the bolts will go through the holes, and that supply fill line will go through this little hole in the back. Now you see how this tank rocks a little bit. So that gasket at the bottom keeps this bowl a little bit off from the porcelain on the base. So you want to kind of get that centered so the porcelain isn't touching. It'll tighten down a little bit, and maybe it will touch a little bit, but you don't want it like off to one side. And in this toilet, it's not going to make a big difference. But some of the other toilets out there, I've showed up to do work and the tanks are actually like off because they've tightened one bolt way too much and the other bolt not enough to make it even. So you just want to make sure that you kind of keep the bowl or the tank even as you tighten these bolts down. And kind of something I suggest is I'll put a little bit of pressure on this tank and kind of squish that gasket down, and then I'll tighten the nuts up, and then that'll help me secure everything. And a little tip at this point as well, remember how I just put the bolts in and then I tighten them up with nuts on the bottom before I set the tank down? you absolutely don't want to mess with these after you've done that step. So the nuts that I put on the very bottom just to tighten the tank down, I'm just going to tighten those up, and these should stay in place, but certainly don't mess with these after you get these tightened down on the tank. Okay, I'm going to re-hook up the supply line. Okay, so here's our handle, and this one's obviously adjustable. So what we're going to do is we're going to get it into place to where it's right over that flapper. Tighten it down. And you might have to make different adjustments, you know, if this handle hits the lid of the tank or, you know, anything, you might have to get a little bit creative and move these things around. Okay, whenever you hook up the chain, you just want to make sure that this flapper is solid. So there's little links here that can be adjusted. You just take this, I'm not even going to try to take it out because it's looped around, but you can put this little end clip on different links and get it to be at the right height. You certainly don't want this pulling up at all, because it'll allow water to seep through. Then you'll have a running toilet. So I have this with a little bit of slack in the chain, so I know it's going to seat properly. And when I lift it up, it looks like it's going to move enough to where it's not going to hit the lid of the tank. This little hose just goes into this port. I have my hose connected. This is what's going to fill the bowl, and then this little float that's inside of this is what's going to fill the tank. So all this stuff is adjustable, and so since there's the float in here, you can just kind of move this back and forth, get this set to where you want the water level. You can see where the old water level is with that line here. So we'll put it back to about where they had it before. Turn the supply line back on. And we're going to start filling. Now there is this little adjustment valve here that we can adjust back and forth. And you'll need to let it fill up once. There's still water in the bowl. So we'll let this fill up. Make sure that this floats at least in the right spot. Then we'll flush it, and we can make the adjustment on this tube to determine how high we want the water in the bowl. And while this is filling up, this is a good time to check all your connections. Make sure your supply line isn't leaking. Make sure there's no water leaking anywhere around these bolts or anything. Anywhere where you might have a loose connection or something didn't seat properly. So the tank's full, no more running water. Flush the toilet. And that's it. So it wouldn't be a construction handyman job if something didn't go wrong. So usually I carry around the Universal Toilet Kit so I can just swap stuff out. I don't have to run to the store. And whenever I show up to do a toilet repair or something like that, I have all the parts that I need. Of course, in this case, I didn't have the right Universal Kit. I guess I needed the 3-inch Universal Kit, and I don't deal with that very often. And so if you're gonna do this project by yourself, make sure you know what size of drain goes in the back. I'm guessing it's probably gonna be the 2-inch, especially with the conservation efforts they have going on with power and water and everything. They don't want you using, you know, big valve, you know, big drains and things. So I also just wanted to remind you, the whole reason the toilet didn't need to be completely replaced is the wax ring on the bottom wasn't bad. The toilet was sat properly, it wasn't leaking or anything. All it was the running in the back. And so if you don't want to replace a whole toilet, go through that whole mess, carrying the toilet, you know, an old toilet out, a new toilet in, and dealing with all that, then you can certainly just rebuild these, and it isn't a big, you know, a big deal at all. So in general, these jobs are pretty simple repairs around the house, and they'll save you a ton of money, because a plumber would charge a bunch of money. Of course, you know, we're friends, so I'm not charging anything. I'm just gonna, I guess the deal was, you know, you can put this video on YouTube and then, you know, do the work on the toilet, so it benefits both of us. And I hope it benefits all of you out there too, that you kind of see how the toilet works and how you can rebuild these yourselves and save yourself a bunch of money. So we appreciate you watching our channel, and we thank you so much for everybody that's subscribed, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks.